Everyone. Let's talk about healing religious body disconnection, body hatred, and rejection of the material world. So, this is a really huge topic, and I'm going to go over an article that I wrote about it on my blog. You can see it in the comments here. But before I get into it, I wanted to share with you that I'm going to be coming out with a home study video course soon that goes over all of the major areas of healing religious trauma, gives you tools and tips. You can do that on your own. I'm also going to be creating a group program for people healing religious trauma, and check out my coaching if you'd like to get individual help. So, many spiritualities and religious systems reinforce views of the body as spiritually inferior, sinful, or as a source of temptation. They degrade the body and also the material world. So, for many people, this is a kind of chronic bodily masochism and dissociation through spirituality. And many of us have been taught to be disembodied beings, to not know how to connect with our bodies, and require retraining to enjoy and fully inhabit our bodies and to appreciate the material world. So, this is especially the case with dogmatic religions, religions of the book, religions that have a sacred text that they dictate and live their lives through. Because I noticed this with Christianity, especially in the Abrahamic religions. A lot of them are very much intellectual, maybe not necessarily logical, but they focus on really the mind and your faith and your ideology, what you believe. You'll notice a lot of the emphasis is on sermons and preaching and sharing of stories, and not a whole lot of body based practices. It's not an integral view of spirituality. And I found this to be the case a lot of times with versions of atheism too, that will overly emphasize rationality, critical thinking, and the mind and figuring things out. And a lot of times when people leave a religion, they'll go into this very heady version, intellectual version of atheism. Not a bad thing, but not necessarily balanced. So living in our minds in this intellectual based spirituality really means we're not fully present with our experience. We're not trained to live in our conscious awareness, that just tune into consciousness, tune into our hearts, and tune into what our body is telling us. And so we're not present with the moment, we're not present with ourselves, and we're not fully enjoying our lives. So, why do religions and spiritualities tend to degrade the body in the material world? Well, an embodied existence comes with many unpleasant realities and limitations. No one is born wanting to die, get sick, or experience pain. And many religions and spiritualities have confused the site of the suffering as the source. So they blamed suffering on the body and the material world in which it takes place. And many of them envision spirituality as a way to transcend the suffering of the body and the world. And traditions were constructed around disconnecting with the body and escaping the pains of embodied existence. So we see this in versions of Hinduism and of Buddhism, this idea of transcending and escaping the material world and escaping an incarnated existence. And there may be some elements of truth to some of that, to aspects of transcendence, but it can be taken to an extreme in a way of basically negating the realm of the material world. So these perspectives degrade the natural world by viewing the material time-bound world as inferior to a spiritual internal realm, and the material realm of nature is split off and subordinated to a supernature realm. The supernatural, it's not a part of the material world. It's superior to materiality. And whatever does not last forever, what is not spiritual, what is not eternal, is viewed as a part of the inferior earth realm. And the things of the body like sex, pleasure, money, and food that are not retained in the afterlife are viewed as lesser, inferior, or even evil, something that we shouldn't focus on, not good, not of the spirit. And so people who have been in these religions often feel very guilty when they enjoy pleasure or sexuality or money and material possessions or anything that does not directly contribute to life in eternity, in the hereafter. Notice it's not in the here and now because the body is in the present moment. It's here and now, not some distant place like heaven. So, how does this impact us? There's often a struggle for people to translate spiritual practice into meaningful action, and they often view social justice as an inferior pursuit, as something that pales in comparison to matters of eternal life or eternal significance. So, making the world a better place, focusing on our material human condition. And life on Earth also is often devalued, or even the environment. Environmentalism can be downplayed, preserving nature in favor of just getting to the other side, getting to heaven. And recreation, pleasure and enjoyment, is not seen as inherently meaningful. It doesn't contribute to spiritual growth in that ideology or to eternity. So we should cut it out and just focus on the spiritual things. And I argue a balanced perspective values the material and spiritual realms as two aspects of the same reality. And holistic spiritualities see them as interconnected, mutually reinforcing, and ultimately the same thing. So these kinds of religions are often dualistic. They separate the spirit from the material world. Philosophical materialism, often associated with atheism, is a monistic perspective. It views all of reality as one, so consciousness and matter are basically the same thing. It's interconnected seamlessly. And with non-dualism or philosophical idealism, the same is true. It's also monistic. In that view, matter is a form of condensed consciousness, essentially. So whichever perspective you take, there really is no separation between spirituality and the material world. It's all one thing. And if you cut out the material world, you're really bypassing the spiritual world. And you're not really fully embodying or practicing spirituality. You can't do it. It's contradictory. They're the same reality, arguably, just on different levels of experience. So how did this get started with Christianity? This is my background, so I can go into this and the Abrahamic religions. Paul the Apostle was essentially the founder of Christianity, or one of them, and he locates evil, suffering, death in the human body. He treats the body itself as if it is a prison that we're forced to indwell until we make it to heaven. And the punishment for our genetic participation in Adam's original sin, when Adam sinned against God in the Garden of Eden, while we live on earth, is being caught in this sinful body until we can be saved from the body's corruption and transformed into an imperishable spiritual body in the resurrection. So in the fall, according to Paul's interpretation of the fall story, the creation story in the book of Genesis, the material world was corrupted and punished with sin, suffering, and death. So suffering that exists in the material world was not just a matter of existence. It's not just the way things are. It was fallen. It's not supposed to be this way. There's not supposed to be pain or death or bodily illness. That is the result of our sin of human corruption. It's not the natural state of nature. And for Paul, death and decay are not natural processes. They're a function of evil. So the life of the Christian is depicted as a war against death that is won only through the Christian's participation in Jesus' triumph over the body's corruption. So it's really a degrading view of the body and of nature itself, and it contradicts what we know about nature. Suffering and decay exist in nature, not because there's anything wrong with them. Death is a natural part of life. It's the flip side of the coin, and pain is the flip side of pleasure. They're both inherent to existence. And when we have this kind of a death negativity, we rage against our own bodies, we rage against nature, and we resist life itself. Death is not temporary or evil, it's a sacred force embedded in the cycles of nature and of the universe. And we can't really experience the fullness of life in the body without embracing death. And so, in nature, in the cycles of nature, death also is the birthing of new forms of life. And it's just part of the ecological process of the cosmos. And we can learn to integrate death into our lives through letting go, through learning to let go of our control, to let grieve things. This would be a whole other huge topic, integrating death. These kinds of religions often try to cut out death and just focus on eternal life, as if death is not something that has any value. So anyway, death hatred, that's another topic in itself. We're getting back to the body here. In New Testament Christianity, not only are bodily matters inferior, they're also dangerous. So instinctual drives of the body are viewed as dangerous temptations and distractions from spiritual matters. The New Testament writers degrade drives and instincts like sex and pleasure seekings as functions of something called the flesh. And this is a Greek word in the New Testament. It's called sarkos. It's translated as flesh or the sinful nature. And it's a term that implies, it means a carnal, sinful inclination and a drive. It's basically, it's about the body somewhat. It implies that being incarnate as an embodied being with bodily inclinations, it's something carnal, it's something sinful, it's something not good that exists in us as a result of the fall. So it's body negativity. And Christians are taught to subjugate or annihilate their sexual and material drives. There's a verse in Romans 7:5, for if you live according to the flesh, you must die. But if by the Spirit you are putting to death the deeds of the body, you will live. So there's this emphasis on the deeds of the body, the flesh, your inclinations, your drive, as something that you have to resist as a matter of life and death. And bodily drives are placed in direct opposition to matters of the spirit, to spiritual matters. Spirit in the spiritual path means denying and crucifying your fleshly desires, your bodily fleshly desires. So body hatred and suspicion of your body intuition and body desires result from this kind of a practice, this intense hostility between your body and your spirituality. And so in this system of thought, the body becomes a dangerous place to live. I mean, to inhabit your body and to appreciate its drives is to play with hellfire. Because if you get into things like sex and money and amassing material goods and enjoying cars or your big house or making money, these things can really lead you down a path of destruction and death and giving up and betraying the faith. So this causes people to disassociate through spirituality, spiritual dissociation, and to use spirituality as a way to escape the body. So let's go into disassociation. This is something that happens too as a result of having traumas and our own personal aversive experiences. So a lot of us disconnect from our bodies because of our traumas that have nothing to do with religion. So recognize that. Western society tends to also emphasize the intellect and the ego and your sense of I and self, and neglect your body and your intuition and your consciousness as well. So this can result from that too. But dissociation is a defense mechanism where we disconnect from our bodies or our minds during pain, during abuse, during physical or emotional pain. It can be something slight, like you just kind of check out and leave your experience, or it can be extreme, where you actually have this experience of completely detaching from your body, from like a third person point of view, it can even be a total disorder where you're basically in a state of dissociation most of the time. So it's dissociation is a good thing. We need it in survival scenarios. We need it when we're in intense pain and there's no anesthesia, or intense prolonged emotional pain or abuse. A dissociation serves a very useful function, but it's only meant for short-term scenarios, not as a chronic learned mode of existence, which is what it becomes when we are taught that our bodies are bad or are shameful or are inferior to other aspects of our humanity. Then disassociation becomes a chronic thing that we do when we have that fear or that shame or that guilt associated with our bodies. We leave our bodies, or our emotions. When we have difficult emotional experiences, we leave those too. And so disassociation is a feeling. It happens when we feel that our bodies are not safe to live in, our experiences are not safe to live in. And this can be somewhat constitutional too. I mean, I'm a very airy and fiery and kind of cosmic type of person. I really love being in my head and my intellect and having transcendent and mystical experiences, and I don't gravitate towards earthly or body-based things. And I think a lot of that is just my personality as well as my religious conditioning and other conditionings. So you might be that way too. But in that case, you will find that that practices and experiences that connect you with your body, like being in nature and also with the material world, grounding experiences are especially healthy and helpful for you. Your psyche will be like, yes, finally, I need this. I've been missing out on this. So it's a great thing to tune into, even if you think this isn't really my natural constitution. It's a part of your being. So there's a way in which these religious and spiritual perspectives are right. There's a partial truth here, and that is that our bodies and our bodily instincts sometimes do conflict with our emotional and our spiritual pursuits in life. I mean, it's not always a good thing to go have sex with somebody, or you might have this aggressive urge, and that could result in breaking the law or getting yourself in trouble if we just follow our bodily inclinations. And we need to learn delayed gratification and planning, life planning, and a lot of times our bodies will be in conflict with that. So but we need to learn how really to tune into all of these things and hold them in balance, how to be integral beings. So there's a way in which these religions will take that and go to this whole massive extreme and basically amputate the body, cut it all out, when we really need to be more balanced. And there is a place for self-control. There is a place for being, even conditioning yourself to not be attached to your bodily impulses, to not be driven by them, to not be owned by your sexual urges or by your urges for money or for pleasure. But rejection, suppression, and shaming of your bodily drives will lead to more suffering and will increase those drives by pushing them down. It will actually increase them in the end. This is why when people often leave religious fundamentalism, they have this stage of, people will say, going crazy and experimenting and doing all these things, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think that might be a necessary stage of learning. But all that suppressed material needs to find its expression somehow. So we want to learn to integrate every aspect of our human nature in a way that serves and nourishes us. But in many religions, especially Christianity, we're taught to surrender our bodily agency to a foreign spirit. So our bodily consent is abdicated in conversion to the faith. It's abdicated, it's given up to the authority of the religious leaders, the sacred texts, and the spiritual deity, the presiding deity of that religious system, as that spirit's possession to animate and to control. And this is in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your bodies. Okay, so this can be interpreted in certain ways that are not as negative, but fundamentalists interpret this really in a very literal way. Like your body and your life is not your own. Give your body to God. Don't tune into your own bodily desires. Don't express them except in a very confined, narrow, sanctioned way. Like all of your sexuality can only be expressed within a monogamous heterosexual relationship. Something like that, right? Incredibly damaging. Not the way our sexuality works, not the way our humanity works. So this kind of a spirit possession, this spirit possession by the deity of the institution, can sever our connection to our body intuition. We're trained to bypass the voice of our body and heed the commands of another master. We're not the masters of our own bodies. So, how do we regain a healthy relationship with our bodies now that we have recognized some of these teachings and abuses and harmful tendencies? There's an infinite number of ways to learn to appreciate and love your body. I also say I didn't really mention the body hatred and the self-hatred. So when we're trained to reject our bodies and view them as evil and to shame our bodily desires, there's really a self-hatred that takes place because we start hating the material world and wanting to escape our bodies, and even hating our bodies because they cause us to sin. They cause us suffering and distress. And we can hate our sexuality. We can hate our inclination towards pleasure or recreation. So really learning to love yourself and learning to appreciate the value of these aspects of your humanity is a big thing. And I mentioned this amputation. This is also literally in the Bible. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about sinning, and he uses a metaphor of cutting off parts of your body rather than being thrown into hell because those parts of your body cause you to sin. And he includes sexual thoughts and desires there. So there are many people throughout church history who have actually amputated parts of their body by literally interpreting this verse. But even if we interpret it metaphorically, it's saying to metaphorically and psychologically amputate a part of yourself. Maybe there are other ways to interpret that verse, but this is a very prevalent interpretation of it. So learn to start practicing loving yourself. When you feel shame, practice gratitude for that thing that you are feeling ashamed of. What do I appreciate about my sexuality? How does pleasure and recreation serve me? They help us be more productive. They help us bring more life satisfaction, all kinds of things. So regaining a healthy relationship with your body. There are so many different ways that we can tune into our body intuition. I mean, one thing I recommend is trusting your bodily intuition. You have the most intimate connection to your body possible. The mind and the body are entirely fused. Everything that affects you psychologically also affects you bodily, and everything that affects you bodily also affects you psychologically. So you can really trust your body. When you feel hungry, eat. When you don't feel hungry, don't eat. So intuitive dieting is a whole thing. Just listening to your body on what it needs to eat. Mindful eating. Using meditations of body scanning. Yoga Nidra is a great meditation. You can look it up with the Insight Timer app. These are bodies that are basically body scans. You just tune into these various parts of sensation in all of your body and learn to connect with and feel and experience all of the parts of your body and actually increase your sensation in your body and your body awareness and your integration of your bodily information. So there really is an innate intelligence to your body, and it's personal to you. So really work on tuning into that and trusting it. There are somatic therapists who work with the body to heal the mind and to release trauma that's stored in the body. So trauma and traumatic reactions are actually stored in the body, with religious trauma too. It's like this kind of trapped energy or trapped psychological and emotional energy that really shows up in parts of your body. I don't know if you notice when you cry, often you might feel it in your chest, and like if you rub a certain part of your body, you'll feel an emotional release. So really, when you have a negative experience or when you're in an emotionally painful experience, uh, tuning into your body and saying, do I feel this somewhere in my body? What does this feel like in my body? And like anxiety is a very bodily sensation. You might be shaking, your heart rate is increased, so in every psychological state too. So working with these things somatically, there are body workers, massage therapists, acupuncturists. They help to clear emotional and physical and psychological blockages. Herbalists, Ayurvedic practitioners, natural practitioners, bringing the body into balance through natural medicines. I mean, I believe in chemical medicines too. Whatever helps your body, all right? Use your own wisdom. And holistic mind, body, spirit practices. Yoga is really great for reintegrating the body. It really helps us to focus in a meditative way on being in the here and now, being out of your mind, out of your thinker, into that bodily awareness, and really outside of the yoga session too, because what it does is it helps you to have that awareness when you're not on the yoga mat too. Meditation, huge, 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 huge. It really helps us to be aware of how the mind is driving us, and also to become aware more of the body and the other parts of our being. So that's great. Breath work, dancing, Tai Chi, martial arts, so many different practices. The sky's the limit. But I really recommend spending time in nature, grounding practices to connect with that material world, because we really do have an intimate connection to the material world as beings who are part of an ecosystem, as creatures of the universe. We are nature. We are life. We are evolution. So connecting with the varied forms of life and the ecosystem and the greater whole really helps us to integrate, and people often have spiritual type mystical experiences from doing that, because it is a holistic whole person experience. And there are tantric sexual practices and sexual meditations too, that can help you to enjoy pleasure and to appreciate and feel into sexual sensation. So just to end, we don't have bodies. We are our bodies. If you think that we also have a separate spiritual being, as long as we're alive in a body, we really are our bodies. It's not separate. It's completely fused with everything that we are. So learning how to appreciate the body, to appreciate the material world, to appreciate the good and the beautiful and the pleasurable things of life, without being attached to them, without being driven by them, allows us to be fully alive and fully ourselves, and spiritual and powerful and authentic and actualized beings. So that's what I have to say for now. If you have more thoughts and ideas on this, please comment below. Please comment about your experiences, your suggestions, what's worked for you. And again, if you're really dealing with this and other issues with religious trauma, schedule a consult session with me to talk about the coaching program. And I'm going to be coming out with more videos and more content soon. You can subscribe to my blog and you'll get emails about all of those and articles like the one we're talking about here. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Catch you later.